Welcome back to Fast Market here on the Schwab Network. It's time for cash tags. For that, let's bring in our next guest. That's going to be Megan Brantley, VP of Research at LikeFolio. Welcome back to the show, Megan.
Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, so we're talking Lululemon ahead of earnings. The stock's bounced about 70, 75 bucks from those lows that we saw just about a month and a half ago. But the stock is still down pretty significantly over the last couple of years. What kind of data are you guys seeing out of the athleisure company going into this report?
Yeah, it's interesting because as you mentioned, Lulu shares have had a really nice month, but if you look at year to date, they're still down, I think around 12%. And according to our data, this suggests that even considering that the bar is still too high, when we look at Lulu, especially when we look at consumer demand of web visits, and that's a lot of times very forward looking because consumers are going online, they're browsing, the products of what these different retailers have to offer. And we see Lulu interest is declining and it's continuing to decline. We've noted this before, but this web visit chart that you see here, that's that blue line. And then the dotted line is the stock price. And so whenever I say that even though Lulu is having a rough last year, you could say we still think the bar is too high. We're starting to see some divergence there in the way that consumer demand is heading versus the stock price. And, the stock has even had a nice week so far. So this could be setting up for a surprise to the downside for Lulu. And part of that, too, whenever you look at our data, you're starting to see these smaller players, more and more of them sort of chip away at Lululemon's market share. Whenever you look at a comparison, you see players like Roan, Alo Yoga, Fabletics, Outdoor Voices, these smaller niche players catering to consumers that once shopped at Lulu. So now that Lulu is maturing a bit, it's starting to get more competition, and we're starting to see that impact at least consumer mind share on our end.
Megan, you touched on exactly what I'm talking about here. I talked to friends of mine and friends of mine's wives and people that know their fashion, and this aloe product is big, enormously popular now with them. And it's almost oh, no, you got to move on from Lulu. You got to go to aloe now is the high quality stuff. And so I see it in my house with my daughters. I see it in adult women. It just seems to be competition. Now, we already know that the U.S. has peaked and is coming off. Just like Nike, there's small, quality competitors out there. But is China really important for Lulu right now? Is Europe and Asia, is that where they're going to show their major growth? I think that's what that's where the hope is, right? That's where the future growth is, because, boy, the U.S., it looks like there's other little brands that are kind of taking over. I don't want to say Viore because that's more men. They have a women's, but it appears to me, the women I've talked to, they really like aloe.
Yeah, for at least in our data, that is really popping right now. And I would say Roan is popping a lot on the men's side of things too. So you have a lot of these specialty players coming in and swooping up those consumers. And it's interesting, just anecdotally, when you look at these mentions, you see a lot of the mentions and a lot of what's driving Lulu are like younger teens. And so, these older, I guess you could say more mature women are kind of moving on to even more upscale brands like the Alo Yoga. That suburban mom isn't going to Lulu anymore. Maybe she might buy it for her daughter, but she's shopping at Alo for herself. And so there's a little bit of a mindset shift there underway in Lulu in this athleisure segment that's definitely impacting sales in the Americas. I know that last quarter comp sales were flat, and we don't necessarily see an improvement this quarter. This data that you're looking at, these are among U.S. consumers. And so this tells us that we still expect some weakness, potentially continued loss of momentum there. And that potential bright spot, like you mentioned, is international growth. I know that China was a big bright spot in its last report, and that's where really the potential for a surprise could be that we're not picking up on because we're really listening to these U.S. consumers. And so investors will certainly be watching there. I know that they're expanding into 5 different international markets this year, I think mostly in Europe. And so that's another potential bright spot. And traditionally speaking, their men's growth has outpaced women's growth at large. And that's an area where we're saying, okay, maybe that's becoming less of a bright spot. We're starting to see a bit of a slowdown there and really starting to see a lot of men going to the brands like you mentioned, like the Rhone, like the Viore.
I kind of like this the comparison chart that you had up there because it makes me feel kind of hip because I wear a lot of Rome and Viore now, so that's a kind of a nice little credence to my ego here a little bit, Megan. But when you look at this and you look at Nike and Lululemon at the bottom, is this also what you guys are seeing as far as a shift to maybe what people are wearing? More people are going back to the office. Are you starting to see those trends start to pick up more where, hey, we're just not doing the athleisure stuff as much as we used to, especially on the women's side?
Yeah, and if you look at a lot of these up and comer brands, they have items that are comfortable but still look office professional, right? It's not necessarily something that you may go work out in, but it's something that looks a little bit nicer, but the material is comfortable and also suitable for the office. And so I think that Lulu is starting to trend there. I know that if you look at some of their product lineups, they're trying to get into more, especially on the men's side, pants and shirts and things like that men can wear into the office, wear to golf. But at large, we are seeing a bigger shift of people saying, we wore leggings for so long. Now let's get some denim. We've talked about, fashion upcycles before. So I think that that's definitely something that Lulu is taking on. And we just aren't seeing it gain a serious amount of traction yet on our end. It's just not showing up in the data that consumers are following through with Lulu specifically, but perhaps they are with other brands. And I will say, just as another caveat, a lot of this has been really negative toward Lulu whenever I'm speaking about this data. But if you were to look at a pie chart of total mind share, Lulu is still the second largest player on that chart behind Nike. This